Welcome back to BADM 614, Health Services Management. I'm your professor, Dr. Roberts, and let's dive into this. All right. All right. So we're into week 6 now. It doesn't seem like it, does it? Well, let's go ahead and do the reading recap from last week, and we're going to talk about the project portfolio part 2, which is going to be due this upcoming Sunday. All right, so chapter 9. It was all about risk. What is risk? So it's the potential for things to go wrong. I mean, that's kind of like the simple description of it, right? Not trying to be too fancy or complicated, but things go wrong, and the potential of them going wrong is that risk. So we have that risk versus reward. Since we're talking about healthcare, most providers, when they prescribe a medication, have to consider the side effects of the medication versus the benefits it will give the patient. Most medications have this long list of possible side effects, upset stomach, headaches, nausea, and so on and so forth. It seems like every medication has a possibility of giving us that, especially if it's a tablet or a pill or something like that. But the benefit that medicine will give is worth the risk of an upset stomach. Like for me, if I'm in pain, my first choice is to use Tylenol, get that acetaminophen. But some people, like my wife, can't tolerate Tylenol because it just gives her an upset stomach. And for her, it's to the point that she will not take the medicine. She'll take aspirin or ibuprofen is her first choice. That's what she does. Now, for me, ibuprofen does nothing for me. I mean, I've just probably had it so much when I was in the military that I've just built up a tolerance, and it just doesn't do anything. But Tylenol still works. But yeah. So that risk versus reward. So that goes into the risk tolerance, which is our fourth bullet point. At what amount of risk are you willing to tolerate? So when we develop the risk probability matrix, so we're considering two factors when we do this. We have the probability of the risk happening versus the impact of that risk. So for example, West Virginia University is in Morgantown. So the chances of it snowing is pretty high in the winter, but the impact of snow is probably moderate, depending on the amount of snow, really. So we could plot that on a heat map or, just on a chart and figure out if it's something we need to even deal with, like create a plan for the mitigation plans. So snow makes the roads difficult to drive on. So what do we need to consider with that? Well, in a healthcare setting, that might not be an issue, but it might be an issue for the flight of a helicopter if we have an air ambulance or air transport of patients. It could be an issue for ambulances, ground ambulances, to move patients from wherever they were injured or ill to the hospital or inter-facility transportation. So there's a lot of things we need to consider, but is the chance of it snowing, is that high enough on our priority list where we need to make a plan for it? It really depends. I mean, if we lived in Alaska and there was a blizzard every other day during winter, that might be a very high one we deal with. But it's probably not even on the list for Florida. So it really depends on where you're at. But the probability of, let's say, the electricity going out in the hospital, that could be a major issue depending on the patient. So having backup generators as the mitigation plan. Spending that kind of money to make sure you have uninterrupted power. That's probably extremely valuable. So it really comes down to the risk of, or the likelihood of it happening, the probability, versus the severity of the impact if it should happen. So Now I have here the known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. So that's a lot of knowns going on there. But this is about the risks and how we identify them. We know that certain risks are going to happen, and we can predict when they are going to happen. So those are the known knowns. We know about them and we know when they're going to happen. But then we have the known unknowns. We know that certain things will happen. We know about hurricanes. But has a hurricane ever hit West Virginia? Is there a pattern to hurricanes coming to West Virginia? That's the unknowns, because we don't have enough history, perhaps, or a track record to know if it's going to happen or not, to be able to predict or forecast. So we know about these things like a tornado or a hurricane or a hailstorm or, a sunny day. I mean, we don't know when these things are going to happen sometimes, but we know that these things do happen. And then we have the unknown unknowns. These are things we really can't plan for because we don't know that they're out there and we don't know how often they're going to happen. So it's really difficult in that last group, the unknown unknowns. But the first two, we should plan and try to come up with the mitigation plans on how to address those risks when they happen, if they happen. So if they happen, we execute our plan, the mitigation plan, to try to reduce the impact of that risk or try to resolve the impact of the risk. And after the risk has been dealt with, we evaluate our plan to see if it was appropriate and effective for that risk. If it's not, we go back and we change the plan. It's that simple. So that's risk. I mean, I could probably talk for a week on risk, but I don't want to drag this video out that long for you guys. But risk is all around us. We just need to figure out where our comfort level is with the risk. Some things that we're going to identify in our risk probability matrix is, things that we should just get insurance, and that's our plan, filing an insurance claim. We drive cars and the government requires us to get insurance, but do we do anything to our car to make it safer to drive, like ourselves when we buy the car? I mean, I personally haven't done anything to my truck, but I have insurance. I have higher than the standard insurance because people are idiots. And chances are that somebody hits my truck or I hit somebody is a known. I mean, I think they say on average, a person gets into an accident once every 3 years. Some people a lot more, other people a lot less, but it happens. So insurance is one way to cover some risk. Yeah. So, great example is, as a medical provider, you might have malpractice insurance that you're probably paying way too much money for. Well, you don't expect to use it, but there could be that possibility that somebody doesn't like what you did. They found a lawyer and, the lawyer is that good where they can convince somebody that you did something wrong. You might not have done something wrong. You might have followed every protocol and procedure to the letter, but for whatever reason, the patient might have had a negative outcome. And so lawyers get involved, insurance gets paid out. Hopefully that's it. But, hopefully none of you guys will ever experience that. So, all right. Contracting and procurement. I actually teach an entire class on contracting and procurement, but this is not that class. So I'll just kind of condense it here. So I'm going to talk about some things that were in the book and some things that are outside the book to give you guys a little extra. So what is a contract? So our book it gave 5 key things, and I changed it a little, but we have the offer, and sometimes there's a counter offer. So think about purchasing a home. There was the listed price for that home, but you've made an offer probably for less than that, right? But then the homeowner, the seller, might have came back with a counter offer. And you might have gone back and forth a couple times until you agreed upon the details of the offer. And then it's put into writing and it's accepted. Both sides sign the purchase agreement or the contract. And in order for that contract to be a contract, there needs to be some type of consideration. Usually it's money, but it could be something else. So if you've ever read your house deed here in West Virginia, it usually says something like in consideration of $10 or the sum of $10 and additional consideration. So that basically says you pay $10 plus some undisclosed amount or other item of value for that home. I mean, it could be that you gave them shares of stock. You might have, gave them a firm handshake. Who knows? It's something of consideration, something of value for both sides. Especially the seller, they have to value what you're giving them to whatever equivalency, right? They have to feel like they're getting a good deal. But moving on beyond that, both sides have to have the authority to enter into that contract. And one way to know if you personally have authority to enter into a contract or not is you've been told. If you have not been told, chances are you are not in what's called a agent for your organization or an agent for whoever it is you're signing on the behalf of. Now, if you're buying a house, you're considered the principal, the actual person. So principal in a business setting means like the owner of the business or the chief person who runs the business. Otherwise, everybody else is what's considered an agent. But you have to have that authority. It might be that you were given a company credit card and you were told you can only spend up to this much money on it. You've been granted the authority to obligate your company's money up to that dollar amount. And of course, we have that legality. Is the contract legal? Now, if you say that you are going to do something and the compensation is going to be the firstborn child of somebody else, that's not a legal contract. You cannot purchase people through a contract. That was done away with many years ago, and it's just in bad taste. So, there's always that joke that, costs, an arm and a leg and a firstborn kid or something like that. But, we have to look at it. Is it a legal contract? For example, we have I believe now in Morgantown, we now have a dispensary of marijuana-based products, or medical marijuana, or whatever it is. So that is in a legal gray area. It might be legal in West Virginia, but it's still illegal by the federal government. So these businesses have a hard time trying to find somebody who they can bank with because the banks have to follow federal law. And the proceeds from drug money, for lack of better words, is an illegal enterprise. So therefore, the bank generally doesn't accept this kind of money. I mean, it's a huge gray area. Lawyers need to get involved and figure things out. But, this is how it is. I actually heard that there is a sheriff that is actually seizing armored cars in another state because those armored cars collect money from medical marijuana dispensaries. Because that, according to the federal government, the DEA, it's a class 1 material. So on the same level as cocaine and stuff. So it's illegal. So that sheriff is actually seizing money from armored cars. So we got to make sure that the contract is legal for us to even get into. And if most of you will have a general counsel or a legal office that you can discuss these things with. If it's job related, if it's personal related, you're going to have to find your own lawyer. So principal versus agent. So principal is the owner of the organization or somebody who is designated with running the organization. I mean, if you're a shareholder, you're not considered an owner of a company in the legal sense. You just own a piece of the company, but it's not like you can walk in and start barking orders. But most people operate in the agent status. You've been granted the authority to obligate money on behalf of the principal. So we have what are called buyer's agents in procurement and supply chain because they're buying on behalf of the organization. And you might have heard of a seller agent or a sales representative on the other side at a vendor or a supplier. So they're representing their respective organizations. So yeah. You might designate your child as an agent of you by giving them a credit card. Depending on your family situation and whatnot, you might give your kid a credit card. Now that's up to you. Contract types. So there's lots of contract types. I believe the book only went into fixed price and cost reimbursable. I threw time and materials in there because that's another one that hopefully you guys can understand. So fixed price, that is, you've negotiated with the other side. They said it's going to cost this price. You sign the contract, they perform the work or provide the goods or services, whatever it is, and you pay them that fixed price. It's already been negotiated. The other one here, cost reimbursable. So this one's a little different. This one's usually combined with fixed price. So if you think of a consultant, for example, they probably charge a flat rate. Might be a daily rate, weekly rate, whatever, hourly rate. They're going to charge some fee, but then they might charge something on top of that. So they might say, okay, well, if I have to provide parts or services or whatnot, then I'm going to charge you for that in addition. And usually there's a percentage tacked on. So actually, instead of a consultant, think of an electrician. They have a trip charge, right? And maybe an hourly rate that they get paid, but then they will charge you for the materials they use. Like if you need a new circuit breaker in your breaker box, well, they'll charge you for the breaker. Yeah, they got time and materials, but cost reimbursable is, that one you really don't see much anymore, but that's, I guess you can say that's kind of like us. We might buy something for the company and get reimbursed for that purchase. I know most companies discourage that because they'd rather have you just pay for it with a government or with a company credit card or go through purchasing to do that. But, if you travel, you might buy your own airline ticket and get reimbursed. So that's kind of like a cost reimbursable. Hopefully I didn't confuse you. I know I kind of rambled a little bit on that. But the next one is centralized versus decentralized. So in purchasing or just at supply chain in general or administration or, different things, we can be centralized where everything is controlled by, let's say, the headquarters or a central office, or we can be what's called decentralized, where the branch offices or the subunits of the corporation or whatnot have a little office that handles things for that local office. So like you have your own HR person in a doctor's office, a WVU medicine doctor's office. You might have somebody that does HR. But you have HR also back at the corporate headquarters. If it was centralized, you would not have somebody from HR in your local clinic. You might have, let's say, accounting or somebody that does purchasing in your local clinic. That would be decentralized. So it really depends a lot on geographic distance. So if you're, uh, not everything can be controlled centrally when things get geographically separated. Most notably, how I teach it is if you have a foreign location, such as in another country, you probably want to have decentralized because they'll know the local ways of doing things. Where, yes, they still answer to the headquarters, but things are done differently in the other country that would not be handled properly if it was controlled under the central office. There is a mixture of centralized and decentralized called hybrid. So it's a mix of both. It can be centralized versus decentralized. Centralized for some things, like, for example, in a healthcare setting, you might have the central office contracting for a new ambulance instead of the local office. Maybe it's because of the amount of the purchase, like the actual dollar amount of the purchase, or they're buying 10 ambulances. You're getting one at your local area, but when they buy in a larger quantity, they can get a better price on each unit. Could be something like that. Where if every individual office purchased their own ambulance, well, it's going to be more expensive. So, yeah, so that's centralized versus decentralized. So, when in doubt, I'll just say this coming from somebody who's actually done contracting and procurement. When in doubt, ask. Contracting and procurement is one of the number one ways project managers get in trouble, because you're spending money, and companies don't like to spend money improperly. So ask. If you need, ask for somebody from the contracting and procurement office to be on your team. Who better to have on your team to do this kind of work than somebody who does this kind of work as their job? It also takes the workload off of you. Yes, as a project manager, you still need to kind of supervise, but leave it to the experts. If you have to do it, or you have someone that's inexperienced to do it, ask for help. That will save you so much headache. All right, so that's chapter 10, contracting and procurement. Project closeout. So the last phase of a project, we're closing it out. This needs to be done properly, because the quality and effort you put into this part is going to impact future projects. And when I say that, it's because people will look at, let's say, the lessons learned or the documents of your project, because they might be doing something similar. And they're looking at how you did it, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can do it that way. But if you put down that you did it one way, but you didn't put what the result was, that it failed miserably, or you had great success. If you don't put that kind of information in, the next person who might be doing something similar could either be going down the wrong path or the right path. So we want to make sure we do like lessons learned, have a meeting at the end where everybody can be free to say what they thought was good, what they thought was bad, without any fear of repercussions. Contracts, the procurement contracts mainly, they need to be closed out. You need to make sure that they're paid, that everything is done, or it's handed over to the procurement department to finish out. Don't just let them hang out there, because that can cause all sorts of problems. If payments didn't happen on something and it's not taken care of, well, that might lead to a lawsuit, because, the vendor wants to get paid. It could be that you're owed a refund. You want to make sure that happens. You don't want to leave money in somebody else's hands. That might be money you need for, balancing the books. So you make sure that everything is wrapped up nicely and put a bow on it. And finally, your team members need closure too. You might need to do a performance review, or something like administratively with those team members before you send them back to their home departments. It could be just having a sit down with them and saying, hey, you did a really great job I'm putting you in for a bonus if you guys are authorized bonuses. Or it could be just, hey, you guys did really well. I look forward to working with you again. Just kind of that, give them that little warm feeling that they did a great job. But the biggest thing is usually there's performance reviews that are needed to be done, especially if your project was long term. It might be time for them to get a performance review so they could be considered for, let's say, a merit increase or things like that. And if they didn't do well, they need to know that too. But, use a method to, you tell them a good thing, tell them what they did wrong, and tell them a good thing. I believe they call that the sandwich method. So, yeah, your team members need that closure. All right. The second part of our portfolio. So you guys have all of these things in eCampus as templates. And like before, modify the template to fit what you're doing. You guys have a lot of good projects out there. I saw that one team wrote up about how they were going to bring in, I believe it was a CT scanner or a PT scanner. And they actually put down how much revenue they expected to bring in from the usage of it. And so they would basically, or it might have been a PET scanner. I don't know. There's some mobile scanner that comes like 2 days a week to Ruby, I believe it is. But if that equipment was there, it could be, yes, it costs $2 million for everything to be installed based on the numbers that were provided in the project. But they also said how long it would take to get the return on investment, which when I did the math was about 1.8 years to get to break even on it. And that's pretty good, especially for spending $2 million. So I think that's a good project to do. I don't know if it's real or not. I asked you guys just to come up with a project. So continuing on with what you started with part one. Now, come up with a stakeholder register. These are the people that have some type of interest or vested interest in the project. It could be executives, it could be fellow coworkers, it could be the public or patients, whatever. It could be the families of patients. Whoever you feel should be on this register, that if something was to happen, you would communicate with these folks. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to give each one a phone call. It could be like a press release or, a news article in whatever the local paper is, or a radio commercial. It could be all sorts of things to communicate with certain groups. Project schedule. Come up with a little bit more detailed project schedule. So your work breakdown structure, start looking at that and see how long things are estimated to take, and come up with how long it should take overall. And remember the relationships between your various tasks too. Not all of them are going to be one finishes, the next one starts. Some others might be this one starts and the other one starts at the same time for certain things. Then we have the RACI matrix. So this is the responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. So who's going to be responsible for the task? So if you look at your work breakdown structure, who's going to be responsible for that task? Who's going to be accountable for that task? Who do you need to consult about that task? And who do you need to inform about it? So that's what the RACI is: responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. Requirements. So what do you need to do this project? Start thinking about your resources that you'll need. Are you going to need 10 people on the team? Let's say 3 from one group, another person. What kind of people do you need? Do you need certain equipment? If you're putting it in, let's say, an MRI machine, I heard those machines are pretty heavy. Do you need a forklift? Or do you need some type of equipment to move it within the hospital until it gets to its location that's going to be installed? Or is that going to be left to the company that's bringing the MRI? I think Philips, I believe, is one brand of MRI machine. Are they going to do the installation? You just have to make sure, they can bring it in. I mean, who knows? All these things, this requirements list is, you see it's only 25 points, but it's great to identify these things now because you might have to work to get them. Like, you can't just snap your fingers and have 10 people on your team. You need to talk with their department managers and say, hey, this is what I need. Who can you give me? And then they might say, well, I can't give you anybody because we're about to do this. And now you need to negotiate for that person. The risk register. So, we had a chapter on risk. This is where we actually write them down and come up with a way to identify when they're happening and how we're going to deal with them. So that is the second part of our project portfolio. Nothing too complicated. It should be an easy week for you guys. And like I said, I'm looking for that you guys understand what these documents are. So put some effort into them. I would like you guys to put all these into one file, like a PDF file, and upload that to eCampus. And I had one group who didn't turn in one assignment because they thought somebody else was. So I want you guys to ensure that the assignment is submitted on time. That way, no pointing of fingers, no points deducted for being late, and everybody's a happy camper. So, and I have one more thing to talk about because we are getting to the end of the semester. We have the final exam. So I'm still working on the final exam, but it's not going to be one of those things that you're going to, try to. I'll just say this. Don't worry about the final exam. Okay. It's not going to be that in depth. I'm going to have some questions that you should be able just to sit down and start typing away. There are going to be essay questions, but there's no word count. So if you can answer the question in 4 sentences, great. If you need a book, okay. I'm not encouraging a book, but I'll read what you submit. So because this is an online class, and I know you guys are busy professionals, I have it opened up, the exam window open for several days. So it's going to open on March 7th at 8 a.m. in the morning, and you'll have until 11:59 on March 11th. I believe that gives you 5 days, if I'm looking at the numbers right. So I have every confidence that everybody will find some time in this window to get it done. I believe March 11th is the actual last day of the class, so I cannot extend it beyond that. There'll be a link at eCampus on the left-hand side that will take you to the exam. It will be on eCampus. Lockdown browser you might have used in your other classes is not needed for this. So don't worry about that. I'm not expecting anybody to cheat because you're grown adults. I mean, if you need to cheat, then there's bigger issues. However, my undergraduate students, they use lockdown browser. I don't trust them. And that's just from experience, unfortunately. But yeah, the final exam's approaching. It's not going to be difficult. I had some things in there that it could be 50 questions or up to 50 questions and complete it within the time allotted. Well, the time allotted is right there, 8 a.m. on March 7th through 11:59 on March 11th. So several days. And I'm going to try to keep it under 10 questions. And I'm shooting just to not have you actually work on the exam for more than an hour. That's my goal. Now, we'll see how well I can do at meeting that goal. So that's all I got for today. If you guys have questions, feel free to send me an email. I did receive an email that for whatever reason, my week 5 video did not get sent out. I don't know what happened. I did everything like I normally do. And so you'll see that link in with this week's email. I'm sorry about that. It's I can't explain what happened. It just didn't go. And yeah. Technology, don't you love it? But like, looking forward to seeing your reading your papers that you already should have submitted, and then your project portfolio that's due up this upcoming Sunday. And yeah, we're almost done, and you guys are getting that much closer to graduation. So if you guys do get the opportunity, I look forward to seeing you walk across the stage. For all of you, it's probably again. Well, it is again because you guys all have bachelor's degrees already. So, all right. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.